Good evening for everybody. Welcome to our Carol Gray Social Story workshops. And thanks for Carol's. I think in this series of workshops, what I think is very nice is not only the contents we have is very comprehensive. We can got an in-depth understanding of social story. The the question and answers each week that we receive from Carol is also amazing. Yeah, the
Thank you.
details and all the clarification, and in this week you will also got some more reference and
Yeah.
that we can go into to further study it. And I think I just love this workshop so much. Thank you, Carol. So without further delay, let me pass it to Carol. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I must say I've been sharing with my husband that this particular format, I've done many uh, webinars, social story webinars online, and this particular format, 1.5 hours and 9 hours total, 6 sessions is phenomenal. And the opportunity to answer questions in writing has been so much fun for me because it gives me time to think about it uh, while I'm making dinner or whatever. Then I go back to the question and I retrieve. And this time there were questions, like the one about waiting. And I thought, oh my goodness, I did a good 20 pages on waiting and lines and all that kind of stuff. And so that I can retrieve it. And attach the original documents instead of sending everybody to Carol's Club to try to find it. I can just go there, boom, I've got it, and there you go. So much fun. And yes, this is an expanded workshop because you're expanding my thinking on many things. We can always learn. So here we go. First I have to share my screen. Share sound. Okay, that's good. Yes. Cancel. Good. Yeah. Okay, and we've got to go back. Okay, and in reference to your questions, I also had stories submitted, and I wanted to share this story with you. Very good story. Interesting, writing a praise or a celebration story about what is praise. So here's the story. Let me read it to you. Praises are good comments made about a person. Praises can be written or directly said to a person. People usually give praise to show their appreciation for others. When I complete my homework or help my mom in the kitchen, I may receive praise. When I receive praise from a person, it usually means the person appreciates me. Uh, yes, you could also say appreciates something that I have done, etc. Um, the only suggestion I had, two suggestions, actually, one that occurred to me just as I read it just now. But first, I want to mention I can say thank you to the person who gives me praise. I would not use can unless the child routinely, when that child receives praise, says thank you. Otherwise, maybe they can't. Or if they haven't done it yet and we haven't observed it yet and it's not a part of their repertoire. Also, there's a variety of different ways that you can respond to praise. And I hope I attached Grace Guide to Compliments. If I didn't, let me know. But I think that was one of the uh, articles that I attached. And there's actually 3 different response options to a praise, to a compliment, probably more. One way we could revise that last sentence would be many people like to receive praise. That's why they often say thank you after someone praises them. Taking the pressure totally off of our audience and going to the third person and just talking about, many people like to receive praise, etc. What I noticed in the beginning, praises are comments made about a person. Yes, but they can also, just to teach the concept, I see a follow-up story. Praises may be used for dogs, and horses. People often praise animals as well, and so you can expand that concept with a follow-up story. Okay, and by the way, I am surrounded by 375-pound basset hounds this morning. That's not usually the case. Usually they are cared for in another location so that I will not be interrupted. So what I did yesterday was we took several walks, and I hope they are thoroughly exhausted. But you may, if you hear some weird sounds, it's probably one of them getting a drink, which sounds like a horse, or it could be their claws on the floor as they go walking past. Hopefully we will not hear any baying or any demanding barks, which occasionally can occur. Okay, here we go. So, addressing generalization issues with social stories. We're in the middle of the fourth criterion. We talked about the first criterion, philosophy, the second, philosophy, definition, and the goal. The second criterion, massively important. And there were some questions that related to the second criterion in the last set of questions, and about gathering information. And then the third criterion, all about one title, two types of sentences, and three parts: an introduction, body, and a conclusion. In fact, in this story, I did make another revision. I organized things into paragraphs. All the sentences were there. We just had to organize them according to the concepts that were presented. So, okay, so now we're talking about format, how we arrange text and illustration, considerations that we take to tailor the information to our specific audience. Dr. Temple Grandin has shared with us that she was in her mid-20s before she knew what a dog was. Typically, developing children can identify a dog sometimes by 18, 24 months of age, which is pretty incredible, actually. As we were talking about, right as we ended our last session, we develop concepts from a very early age. If we didn't, when we began speaking at 18 months, we'd have to say, Mom, look at the golden retriever, look at the Rottweiler, look at the Chihuahua, look at the Chinese Sharpei, and it would be overwhelming. Those concepts enable us to interact with our environment from an early age, and to do so with some confidence. So I think it's fascinating that the concepts are there before we begin to speak. But for Temple Grandin, that was not the case. And so she couldn't figure out how people knew what a dog was. And when you think about it, there aren't a lot of similarities between dogs. Sometimes people say, well, they have 4 legs, they have 2 ears. So does a horse, a cow, a pig. So if I was to write a social story for Temple Grandin at age 5, when her peers are starting to talk about farm animals, which is a bigger category, domestic pets, which is a bigger category, and here's Temple, she can't see how people are seeing similarities between dogs. So in her mid-20s, she finally figured it out. She identified that all dogs have the same nose. By the way, this particular basset hound is about 6 feet from me, and as in the photo, sound asleep, thankfully. This is Hank. But Temple identified that all dogs have the same shaped nose, and that is how she identifies dogs. What was interesting to me when I heard Temple describe this was, I didn't know all dogs have the same shaped nose. So how did I establish those categories at 18 months. It's fascinating. So how would we write a story for Temple to maybe have a chance at helping her establish category dogs? So here's my title. This is a story about dogs, just dogs. This is a story about dogs, just dogs. This is a photo of a dog. Sometimes people say, this is a dog, when they see a photo like this. I know it would be so much easier to say this is a dog, but we have to be literally accurate in a social story, especially for a young child. And this is not a dog. This is a photo of a dog. But as an author, I would really like permission to say this is a dog through the rest of the story. So I explain myself. This is a photo of a dog. Sometimes people say this is a dog when they see a photo like this. This is a dog. I used to have one of those. You're constantly brushing them. This is a dog. These are dogs and a pig. A pig? A pig does not belong in this story. That's better because this is a story about dogs, just dogs. You can also do, this is a story about horses, just horses. And there's a lot of variety in terms of horses, etc. Get the idea? So this would be a great story master for teaching what is a dog, what is a horse, what is a cow, what is a cat. Cats actually have more similarity. Dogs really have a lot of variety. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so think again about social stories and how they've changed. In fact, one of the questions was related to, is there a comparison chart, social stories 10.0, 10.1, 10.2? And I had one, I read through it myself, and reading through it, you can really see how social stories have grown up. Definitely reflecting the research as well as our experience and the experience of others writing social stories. So I'm going to share with you a social story that I wrote many, many years ago for a family with a young child diagnosed with autism. They were planning to fly on an airplane. It was going to be this little girl's first flight. They were going to fly on an airplane to Florida, which is a very frequent destination here, Disneyland, etc., Disney World. And so very excited, but also concerned because their little girl was hesitant to use toilets outside of the home. She would, but as they considered the uniqueness of an airplane toilet, they thought, oh my goodness, that will be off the chart. And she did have some resistance, often would not use a toilet in the community. But if she really had to go, she would, which was in their favor. Anyway, so here we go. How did I write a social story years ago? And how would I write that story today? And it's in Carol's Club if you want to look it up. Okay, so years ago, here's the story, the original, learning about toilets and airplanes. My name is Emma. Soon my family will be flying on an airplane to Florida. I never change or correct stories. I always present them as they were originally written. I think that's ethical, but we need to make a revision here. You don't fly on an airplane. It'd be quite dangerous. You fly in an airplane to Florida. This is the toilet in the bathroom at home. I use it to pee and poop. This is a toilet in an airplane. People use airplane toilets to pee and poop. I will try to use the airplane toilet to pee and poop too. The problem with this sentence also is, but what if she doesn't, in a 2-hour flight, feel the need to use a toilet? Would she have to try to use it? No. So we would need to revise this sentence. Okay, so how would I write this story today? My name is Emma. I am learning about toilets. This is a picture of a toilet. Sometimes people just say, this is a toilet when they see a picture like this. People use toilets to pee and poop. This is a toilet. This is a toilet. Notice how different they look. This is a toilet. Looks different again. So we're forming concept this toilet. But what about concept other toilets? These are 3 photos of one, or you could say the same toilet. Still working on that concept for one toilet. These are toilets. Now we're starting to introduce some variety, including a urinal. Now we're placing them in context. Now look at how different each of them look. These are toilets and bathrooms. This is the toilet in our house. I use it to pee and poop. It is safe and okay. This is a toilet in an airplane bathroom. People use it to pee and poop. It is safe and okay. I am going to fly in an airplane. If I have to pee or poop, there's a very important phrase. I may try using the toilet in the airplane bathroom. It is safe and okay. And there's that phrase that we were talking about in the questions and answers, very close to this is okay. Probably the most popular, definitely the most historically classic phrase from social stories. But the question was raised and had me thinking, should that phrase be dropped? I would say, especially perhaps in reference to certain contexts or certain situations, etc. I do use the phrase, it is safe and okay, a lot. So interesting. And that question really had me thinking. Okay, considering categorization and generalization issues, what's the best title for Emma's toileting story? This is in your workbook, page 8. Interesting. My last workshop, which was just a couple weeks ago, my last webinar, something was brought to my attention. And there are 3 choices here: learning to use the toilet, learning to use a toilet, and learning about toilets. And which one would you select from these 3? Most people, and the one that I would definitely select would be learning about toilets. But the point was made, the story was really about learning to use toilets, not so much about toilets. I could see where you could go either way, but I think we could also add a good title, might be learning to use toilets, because bottom line, that's what we want her to do. So I felt that that was an excellent suggestion. Okay, so I mentioned Story Masters, and I'm going to give you more information on that. Story Masters can be used to build concepts and which then support generalization and across time, across settings, etc. So when you talk about computers, a master file is the file that's used for creating others that are similar but not identical to the original. So a story master is a story that is used as a master or a model for others that are similar but not identical. And the reason we do that is because we want to establish concepts, support generalization, etc. I went to my ophthalmologist for my annual eye exam, and he explained to me that he had 2 patients, grandparents of a child with autism, and they were having some real difficulty with that child with autism. Whenever they would go into a restaurant, and of course, grandparents like to take kids to McDonald's, etc. Well, whenever they would go into a restaurant, their grandson would select the table. This is okay, except he would select the table that he wanted, whether somebody was seated there eating their food or not. He had been known to run into a restaurant and clear a table of its food right in front of the very surprised patrons who were eating their dinner. So, of course, the grandparents were hesitant to take the kids to restaurants as a result. And so my ophthalmologist mentioned to these grandparents, well, Carol Gray writes these social stories. I'll ask her if she'll write one for you. So you have to try. Right? So on the way back from my appointment to my home, I passed actually 3 McDonald's. And so I jumped into each one and I took a variety of photographs. And here's the story. Oh, right. Before we get there, so I want you to take a moment and think, so what concept am I trying to teach? Just jot down a couple ideas. I'm going to give you, just about 15 seconds or so. Identify the concept that I want to teach on this one. Okay, we'll get back to that. So here's my story. Places to sit and eat at McDonald's. Sometimes when family eats at McDonald's, we usually sit and eat at a table. We may eat at a table that looks like this. We may eat at a table that looks like this. Or we may eat at another kind of table. This is okay. Notice how hard these illustrations are working. I have taken the text. Speaking of format and what you can do with format, I've taken the text and I have actually placed it on a blank table where there are no people seated. So we may eat at a table that looks like this. Now, ideally, I would have loved to have people at other tables, but for my photographs, I actively avoided those other people because I did not want to run into confidentiality issues in presentation. But certainly you could ask for permission to include other people. So here we go. We may eat at a table that looks like this. We may eat at a table that looks like this. Or we may eat at another kind of table. This is okay. Sometimes my family eats at McDonald's. We usually sit and eat at a table. Notice I did not describe his current response. I hesitate to describe a child's current negative response in a social story because it gives it more meaning, it gives it more power, it places it in the suggestion box as a possible response option if it's interpreted differently. And often I don't include any sentences that coach the audience because I really want the person, the audience of the story to come up with their own more effective response. They don't have to do life the way I do it. I want them to be effectively social adults, and I want them to learn to take information and develop a response that's consistent with their own personality. But I was concerned that maybe this story would not be effective as written because there is no suggestion of what to do other than we might eat at a table that's where no one is seated. So I sent along an additional page that the grandparents could include if they wanted to. Sometimes my family eats at McDonald's. We may sit at a table that looks like this. If someone is already sitting there, we will try to look for another table. They did not need to use that page. The story was immediately effective. I was blown away. I'm still surprised when stories work so well their first time out. So the grandparents called me and they were thrilled and they said, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is awesome. We are good to go. And I said, oh, you are so not good to go. Here's what you have to do. Now, I want you to go to several Burger Kings. I want you to take photographs of empty tables. I want you to create the identical story, but it's now about Burger King. I want you to go to Olive Garden. We have Olive Garden as a chain here in the United States. I want you to go to several Olive Gardens. I want you to do the same process, same text, except change it for each restaurant. Because we are then going to write a final story. Sometimes my family eats at a restaurant. And we're going to have photos of McDonald's, Burger King, Olive Garden, whatever restaurants we selected to lead up to this particular final story. And we may sit at tables that look like these, and we're going to have examples of many empty tables from an assortment, a random assortment now of different restaurants. Because the concept we are trying to teach is you can't always sit where you want at a restaurant. And that's how we're going to get there, one logical step at a time, which is consistent with how many children with autism learn. Okay, so what about older students, older audiences? We have social articles. They adhere to and comply with all of the I've got a dog on the move. They adhere to and comply with all of the social story criteria, but they are written for an older audience. We never want to insult the audience. We often are exclusively use third-person statements because beginning a social story article with "My name is Benjamin" could be a little sound juvenile and be a little insulting. Sometimes, and I'm going to give you an example of this, the author may identify his or herself and then share their own similar experience in the first person. It can be so tempting when you are writing a social article, you want to give that person some advice based on your own experience. But the only way you can do that is to say, you know, I've had my name is Carol Gray, and I am writing this for you. And there were times when I made mistakes with interrupting. Here are some things that I have learned, or here are some things that I have tried, but you have to identify yourself as the audience. And that was or as the author. It was a strategy that I was thrilled to discover because it made it so much easier to write social articles. And we're going to use advanced vocabulary. You know, with computers now, it used to be we were talking about newspapers, which were written in many times Times New Roman font. Now all bets are off. There's a lot of different fonts that are used. So that will probably be dropped in future webinars. And you want your organization to be like a web page, perhaps, or a newspaper. What I like about social articles is, for me, they are so much easier to write because you've got more time. You have a longer attention span with your audience. And so you can explain and describe things in greater detail. And you can also link to other resources. And here it is, Gray's Guide to Compliments, social workbook. Tony Atwood out of Australia, and I, for, 2 or 3 years, conducted joint workshops throughout the United States, England, and Australia. Yeah, and had a lot of fun doing so. And Tony, in his presentations, would often mention that complimenting is a very important skill for young adults. And I thought, you know what? We've been writing all these stories for young children, and children maybe through elementary school age up to the age of 12, but maybe we should write for adults. And so I took a stab along with Tony, and the two of us wrote Gray's Guide to Compliments, a social workbook. We thought this would be pretty easy, maybe 2 or 3 pages. It turned out to be some 20-some pages, because the more we looked at compliments, the more complex we realized complimenting really is, and we had a lot to explain. So first we had to describe what a compliment was. I had a lot of fun. I love to draw. I had a lot of fun illustrating this one as well. So we had to describe what a compliment is. And then we needed to talk about the different response options You can acknowledge it, you can agree with it, you can appreciate it. The story this morning, we were encouraging the little guy to appreciate those compliments, but you could always say, well, he could acknowledge it. Oh, I'm glad I could help, etc. So then what we learned, surveying all these audiences that we encountered in our travels, we gathered information and surveyed audiences. So how frequently do you compliment someone based upon your relationship with that person? And here's what we discovered. If it's a loved one, a spouse, a family member, 1 to 2 times a day. If it's a coworker, a friend, maybe about 1 to 2 times a week. A coworker and not a friend, maybe 0 to 1 times per week, and then a friend 1 to 2 times a week. Kind of interesting. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of, I think it is more of a social article, especially due to its length. Apologizing for an unintentional mistake. Boy, if you don't think this is a complex thing, because there's 2 things going on here, making an apology, but also the mistake is unintentional. And I'll be darned, apologizing for an unintentional mistake is much different. It feels different than apologizing for an intentional mistake. So before I share the story with you, I want you to brainstorm with yourself. And I want you to write down as many characteristics as you can think of an effective apology. I'll give you an example. An effective apology is sincere. In other words, the person is genuinely sorry and regretful that someone was hurt by their actions or statements. Okay, so what else? What makes a good apology? I'll give you about 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to share excerpts. Keep in mind, this is not the entire article. Apologizing for an unintentional mistake. And in this article, the pronoun he is going to be used in reference to a person, whether male or female, in place of the more awkward he and or she. My name is Carol Gray. I am not an expert on apologies, although admittedly, I do routinely make mistakes that require them. This gives me a wealth of experience that, along with my observations of others over the last several decades, provide an extensive apologetic background. This article shares my thoughts and theories about apologies and the 7 characteristics, of those that are most likely to be effective. Then I continued with a paragraph, a disclaimer saying that my thoughts and theories might not be true in every culture or every situation. And then I followed that with a paragraph with a definition of an apology. I also provided some reassurance that all people make mistakes. The human brain is inherently fallible. It's not perfect. And some of those mistakes are intentional and others are unintentional. Then I gave a case example to demonstrate the difference between an intentional or an unintentional mistake. This is a true story. When I was 3 years old, I put my sister's doll suitcase in the toilet. And that was an intentional, that was an intentional mistake. I really wanted to do that. I don't know why, but I was guilty. So that was an intentional mistake. Now we focus on the focus of the article, and that is unintentional mistakes. People often feel uneasy or anxious when they've made an unintentional mistake and need to apologize. Understanding where the discomfort is coming from may help. So here I'm focusing on feelings, but again, trying to not assign feelings to the audience, which can be very difficult to do. So apologizing may be uncomfortable because, with no negative intent, realizing someone is hurt is a surprise or a shock. Or it might be difficult to take responsibility for, and each of these, of course, was expanded into a paragraph. It might be difficult to take responsibility for a mistake when it is accidental. I mean, you didn't mean to do it, so there you go. The person hurt or inconvenienced by the mistake often feels hurt or angry, and so they're not as much fun to approach as they usually are. So apologizing is not always uncomfortable. Sometimes it's pretty comfortable, and it's important to identify the range of possible feelings that someone may encounter, not assigning those feelings to the audience. Apologies may take many forms: verbal, email, etc. So, and then I identified what I felt were the 7 most important characteristics of an effective apology for an unintentional mistake. It's sincere. I talked about that one. It uses good timing. You don't want to wait a year. Might be better to apologize as soon as possible. Begins with a name. Describes the mistake. Gee, Angela, I am so sorry that I accidentally or unintentionally, etc. And then you describe what you did. It expresses regret. I'm so sorry I did that. And acknowledges the other person's feelings. I know you may have felt badly. Is responsible. Let me make it up to you. Okay, so just an example from a social article. Here's another excerpt from a social article for JB. You remember JB? He's one of our workshop audiences who is singing louder than the high school choir. There are many students in the Jenison High School choir. Each student tries to sing at the right volume. This gives the choir a sound that is organized and pleasant for the audience. Okay, so another important consideration when we are developing a social story are the illustrations. You saw how very, very hard they can work in the McDonald's story. So here are some factors to consider. We want the illustration to enhance but not distract from the content of the text. I had a father who learned about, father of a child with autism on my caseload, preschooler, and the preschooler was terrified of the Cookie Monster. Whenever the Cookie Monster came on television on Sesame Street, this little guy was pretty upset. And the dad wrote a very nice story about the Cookie Monster, and unfortunately then decided that maybe the best way to present the story to his child would be to dress up as the Cookie Monster. So he actually rented a Cookie Monster costume. It was October, Halloween here in the United States. It was probably not a good idea, creative, but not good. And so we quickly wrote several other stories to describe that, no, your dad is not really the Cookie Monster, that he put on a costume. We had to take photos of dad putting the costume on and taking the costume off and putting it away permanently. Also, we want the illustrations, if we can, to be interesting and meaningful for the audience. In Emma's story, I did the original story, Emma, who is fearful of using the toilets. I drew it. She was interested in ducks. I drew a duck using a toilet. It was a really good illustration, actually. And the story worked. It was a little risky, especially looking at that now, because at the time, and I still don't know if she understood the fictional quality of since ducks don't really use toilets, which is why we have the guy on the left here reminding us that it's okay to use a fictional character. I really like fictional characters, like my duck. They can go there first. They can demonstrate what you do. But you want to make sure that your audience understands fiction and what is a fictional character, that concept is meaningful for them. You can also include charts. I love to include charts. I often survey. We'll talk about taking a survey actually and sharing that information then in a chart, figures, diagrams for a more advanced audience, even for younger children. I once wanted to demonstrate that each person experiences a peanut butter and jelly sandwich differently to a group of 6-year-olds, a first grade classroom. And I had read that right around age 6 or 7, children start to notice children around them more and start to notice the similarities and differences. And so I thought, what a great time to get in there with activities to help them explore the differences among them in a single classroom. And the result was the peanut butter and jelly survey. If I can find it, if you're interested, let me know in the chat. I'll see if I can find it. I don't know if I can. But actually it was from a curriculum that I wrote called A Collection of Children. And there were several surveys, but kids identified how they prefer their peanut butter and jelly sandwich to be made. And then we made a big graph for these first graders. It was awesome. So much fun. And I had 3 children with autism included in that classroom. Okay, so it may include charts, figures, diagrams, etc. We can use a combination of illustration methods and always make sure that your illustrations are safe. Okay, so I want you to look at these photographs. Let's say we're writing a social story about swimming. Which photos can we use to illustrate the story? I want you to consider these. I'll give you, about 30 seconds. Some of these photos we cannot use in a social story. Ready, go. Okay, I'm going to give you a hint. The photos that we cannot use in this story or any story, especially for a young child, but I would not use them with anyone with autism, and that is 1, 3, and 5. Why? We can't use 1, 3, and 5 because there's no one else in the photo with them. In other words, they are swimming alone. And interpreted at face value, especially if you have not developed concepts or you do not in your mind retrieve relevant past experience readily and quickly, these are very, very dangerous photos in 1, 3, and 5 because the child is alone. Now, let's say, see that little girl in photo number 3. Let's say she's typical and I show her the photo and she would likely say, oh, yeah, that's when I went swimming with my dad. He's right there, right? She retrieves relevant past experience to interpret the information in a photo. But again, as I mentioned, a little gal with autism may not retrieve the event surrounding that particular photograph. And this becomes a very, very dangerous photo illustration. So when using photographs to illustrate, be careful. Also with extraneous information, sometimes I use circles or arrows to draw attention to the most relevant aspect of any given illustration. And of course, let me see if we talk, yes, we're going to talk about these. We can certainly personalize the formats. In fact, the definition of the fourth criterion encourages us to tailor a story to not only the abilities, but also the interests of the audience. It makes the stories more fun. If they're more fun, they're going to internalize and generalize much faster, I would think. That's a guess, it's a theory, than if it's kind of boring, right? So can you put social stories to music? Yes. Can you use a fictional dinosaur? Yes, if the child understands the fictional quality of the dinosaur in the story. And a very interesting format, very specialized format that I used, the child was 7 years old, in the second grade, would become very upset if whenever he lost anything, and he always had something in his pocket at school. It could be a paper clip, it could be a little Lego block, but he always had some little thing that he brought with him. And it really wasn't a problem unless those things went missing. And then it was a problem, including when he was playing with something and he couldn't find the Lego block that he wanted, that quote was just there, etc. So his mom, I had written several social stories for this little guy, and his mom said, what are we going to do about this problem with him losing things? Because am I going to have to write a story about little block and about little paperclip, etc.? And I said, no. And I said, we're going to turn this around. It's not going to be about losing things. It's going to be about finding things. So the title of the story was Finding Things. The child was very interested in trucks. And I had just read in the book Lost and Found by Hartman and Gelman, a rabbi and a priest. They call themselves the God Squad. And they wrote the most phenomenal book called Lost and Found. And it's not a religious book, as they explain in the beginning, but it's all about life's losses and life's discoveries. And so I thought, okay, the one thing that the God Squad or Gelman and Hartman say in their book is that whenever you encounter any sort of a loss, you have to keep moving. And as I looked at children with autism, I thought, yeah, they have difficulty keeping moving. They often drop to the ground right where they are, very devastated by losses that for people without autism would seem pretty inconsequential. So I wanted to illustrate you've got to keep moving through a loss. And so without mentioning it, I superimposed trucks at the bottom of a comic strip. Again, a very unique format for a story to indicate move, 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 keep moving. And here's the text. If I lose a toy, people can help. Mom or dad know how to help. We may try to think and look. My toy is somewhere. And you'll see in the illustrations, we have a little bear that's lost. We wrote another story, didn't change the text at all. This was a story master for probably about 12 stories, each time depicting a different toy in the illustration. Work like a charm. Okay, another way that we can make our illustrations work and work hard for us is they can actually demonstrate. I discovered this writing social stories for a very large audience, everyone impacted by COVID-19. When the pandemic first began, I immediately got to work writing social stories to explain COVID-19 and various aspects of the pandemic to children with autism, and those were immediately placed on the website. They're still there and easily accessible. So one of those stories was COVID-19, I Can Help. And I want you to watch and how I made the illustrations work really hard to demonstrate an extremely important concept related to COVID-19 is the fact that you can't see it. As a child, you are being asked to do all these things: wash your hands, keep a distance from people. There's nothing there. So why suddenly the change in these precautions? And so we have to convince children that and demonstrate that it's there and you can't see it. This is a picture of a COVID-19 virus taken with an electron microscope. A real virus is much smaller than this. That's better, except the real COVID-19 virus is much smaller than this too. That's better, except the real COVID-19 virus is much smaller than this too. Oh, that's better. No, the real COVID-19 virus is much smaller than this too. Yes, that's it. People need an electron microscope to see the COVID-19 virus. I Can Help. Notice I did use, I didn't want to use I May Help. I debated about that. It would be more correct with social stories, but most children, I think, understand and participate in hand washing. So I thought I Can Help. It sounded better to me. I can help by washing my hands in warm water on all sides, rinsing well, and drying with a clean cloth. Now here I wanted to demonstrate the passing of time, that you're not washing your hands for a millisecond and running off, that you're actually investing more time in this than you may have done in the past. So I have this picture of a little girl and she's washing her hands, and same girl, dressed the same. And so trying to demonstrate the passing of time. To make sure that I wash long enough, I may sing my favorite song or count very slowly to 20. Washing my hands helps me stay healthy. Okay, so take a few moments. How are you going to organize the text and illustration to build meaning with format and illustrations for your audience? And this is in your workbook on page 11. So I want you to, you've seen some examples, the McDonald's story, the washing hands story, etc. What can you do with your topic for your audience? And I'll give you, about a minute to 2 minutes for that. Okay, moving on. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about criterion 1 and researching a story, which is criterion 2 and step A. And now we're still in step B. That's where most of the criterion lie. And we are going to be talking about criterion 5. Are there any immediate questions related to clarifying the content of the presentation at this point? Otherwise, I will move on.
Yes, we have some questions.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the questions, I think we'll go through. One of the question is there any upper limit of age for using the social story?
Oh, is there any prerequisite age? No, I would say the youngest child that I've ever written a social story for was if I'm understanding the question correctly, was a 2.5-year-old, the washing machine story. And that was the youngest little person. There was a child just under 2 years of age who was upset by wind-up toys. You know, you wind up a little bunny and then you put it down, boom, 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 and it hops. Any wind-up toy was very upsetting for this little person. And I wrote a story, actually took apart a few wind-up toys to show what was inside and how it worked. Dissecting children's toys. So yeah, I would say from my experience, 2 to 2.5 would be the earliest. But I think you could certainly try earlier.
And there's no upper limit, right?
There's what?
No upper limit. The oldest one.
Oh, no. No, in fact, I wrote one for my husband a couple of years ago. and he's 70, so no, actually, no limits, and it worked. He talks about the weather a little too much, but not anymore. So, okay. I'm going to move on if that's okay, unless, is there another question that I should answer right now? Otherwise, I do like the format where I answer them later, because then we can cover more information live.
Yes. Okay.
Everything looks good? Yeah,
Yeah,
nothing super where somebody's super confused or something. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Criterion 5. 5 factors to define the voice and vocabulary of every social story. A social story or article has a patient and supportive voice and a vocabulary that is defined by 5 factors. And here they are. A social story should sound like your grandmother on a good day. They do have each and every one of them, very characteristic, patient, supportive. If they don't sound patient, supportive, like your grandmother on a good day, a mistake has been made somewhere in terms of the criterion. So every social story uses first and or third person statements. Second person statements are not allowed because we discovered that when we first started writing social stories in 1991, we did have second person statements. And what we discovered is that some of our students were becoming very, very nervous, etc., trying to get things exactly right. For example, you should listen to your teacher, and they would go in and, okay, and get it wrong. And the story said that they should, and they were very, very upset. So to contribute to the emotional and social safety requirement of the philosophy, the definition, and the goal, second persons do not appear, which means that second persons do not appear, which which means that author assumptions and anything that contributes to a judgmental tone also does not appear, etc. And you rarely see the word you in a social story. So writing in that first person voice increases author responsibility because now you are basically talking for the audience when you are talking in that first person voice, and you want to go to great lengths to not misrepresent that person's experience. But as Tony Atwood has shared with me, he really likes the first person voice in a social story because, especially for a younger audience, because it is the perspective that they most readily understand. So what you want to do is be very, very careful as you are writing. You would not want to say, for example, my name is Joshua. I like many foods. If this is a child who has restricted food preferences, you always want to accurately represent the audience, especially when you are writing in their voice. What I frequently do, I think almost always, is use the first person and third person statements in a social story. Okay, so we're going to have a quiz. I'm going to, on the first of the 5 factors that define voice and vocabulary, I'm going to provide you with a statement and I want you to think, save it or erase it. Here we go. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I'm going to erase it. What about this one? I learned to write my name. First person voice, we can keep it. Okay, next, the second of the 5 factors. Describe or demonstrate the connection between related past, present, and or future events. This is right in line with our effort to build concepts. And sometimes people will say, oh, wow, connect past, present, and future. This is a very little person. That would be a very long story. Actually, no, you can, in just a few sentences, write a story that connects past, present, and future. Like this one, I am learning to tie my shoes. I learned how to button. I learned how to zip. I am learning how to tie my shoes. Someday I will be able to tie my shoes. End of story. We want to maintain a socially humble, positive, and patient tone throughout the story. This is where many stories that I'm presented with that jump off the page and tell me immediately, I am not a social story. They definitely have deviated from the third factor in Criterion 5. What we say and do and how we say and do it matters enormously to the people in our care. I consulted with Amy Laurent and Jacqueline Feedy, both of them PhDs, as we were developing Social Stories 10.3. Jacqueline Feedy is an adult with autism, and Amy Laurent is very well known as a very talented occupational therapist here in the United States. And what Jacqueline pointed out to me was that she had been presented with many stories that she now understands were not social stories, that were basically just do this, do this, do this, do this. And as a result, she didn't look forward to being presented with stories like that. Jacqueline and Amy frequently conduct workshops with audiences, etc. And you have the entire quote in your workbook, but this is an excerpt from their experience, people bringing social stories up to them. Here we go. Unfortunately, people often present us with rules written nicely at best, or imprisoning scripts for expected behavior, complete with pictures of exactly what the autistic person should or should not look like or do. In this in these moments, in those moments, we know our job is to level up. Level Up is the name of their organization. The staff's understanding of the intent of social stories. We know we must drive home the fact that they are never to be used to gain an individual's compliance. That's for sure, and never have been. And so that's why we prohibit socially or emotionally arrogant vocabulary, any word or any phrase that has a judgmental or authoritarian goal or tone. For example, the words should not, supposed to, must not, ought to, you ought to know better, etc. It's really bad, naughty, and of course, inappropriate. And use caution with the word can. Often I try to use may instead, or rephrase in the third person. Okay, so let's look at some prohibited versus positive phrasing. On the left, a spelling test shows me the words I don't know how to spell. And the more positive on the right, a spelling test is one way for children to learn which words they know how to spell now and the words they will know how to spell with more practice. I need to talk to adults with respect. How can we change that? Talking with respect is using a calm voice and friendly or cooperative words. Talking with respect is important. So I want you to take a few moments and see if you can improve these two phrases. There's no reason to be upset when the fire alarm goes off, and my little sister Kate knows how to use the toilet. I am almost 3 years old. I still use diapers. Ready, go. Okay, let's look at the first one. There's no reason to be upset when the fire alarm goes off. We could use some, we definitely could describe why there is a fire alarm. Several years ago, I was contacted by the national, I can't remember the name of the organization. Anyway, fire safety, a national fire safety organization here in the United States. And their concern was that children who were included in general education settings, when there were fire drills, a couple of things were happening. Some parents told the school to basically contact them whenever there was going to be a fire drill, and they would keep their child home from school that day. The concern, of course, being that the child in an actual fire would not know what to do. That was a concern. They were also discovering children with autism in random parts of the building instead of outside where children go when there is a fire alarm. Traumatized children with autism were found in the custodians, often in the office or a place that they considered to be safe. Custodians' quarters was one of them. And so they said, can you write social stories about fire alarms? And so I did. I wrote several about all different kinds of alarms and drills. And what I learned was a drill is the most perfect way that something can be completed, especially with a large group of people. Perfection. So many of the children I have worked with would love to do things absolutely perfect, the way it should be done. And so I wrote stories describing why the drill has, the alarm has an uncomfortable sound, but also describing that a drill is a perfect way of doing things. And what you're doing is you're practicing how to basically leave a building when there is a fire. And chances are that the fire is not close to you. It probably could be in the kitchen, etc., where those things are often used, but the fire alarm goes off and everybody leaves, even if the fire is not close to you. So providing that information, I created a collection of fire alarm and fire drill stories, and they now appear in the 15th anniversary edition of Social Story book published by Future Horizons. This one, my little sister Kate knows how to use the toilet. I am almost 3 years old and I still use diapers. Definitely there's an implied put down here. Never in a social story in any way, shape, or form do we discredit the audience or use comparisons like this one. So we could simply use, I am learning to use the toilet. Okay, so as the criterion change, stories that we have written in the past may not meet the current criterion. And such is the case of some stories that originally, and even still, I was very proud of. I wrote stories for tragedies, etc. And I went back to those stories after we completed Social Stories 10.3 and thought, I wonder if those would need to be rewritten or if they still comply. And there definitely are some improvements that I could have made. So before, in the story, What is a Tragedy? We had the phrase, a tragedy is a very sad time, especially for the survivors. That's not always true. And this is a deviation from the current fifth criterion, which emphasizes that you cannot assign how the audience should, there's the should feel. So then I tried to revise that text. And here it is. Survivors may feel frightened, angry, confused, tired, or sad during or after a tragedy. They may feel relieved, determined, or hopeful too. They may have other feelings too. Or if I wanted to make it shorter, survivors of a tragedy often have big feelings about what has happened or what to do next. Or you could just say often have feelings about what has happened and what to do next without identifying what those feelings are. Okay, again, from tragedies on televisions. Many newer televisions have a big, sharp picture screen. This makes it fun to watch my shows because it feels so realistic, like I am really there. But I think we could, I messed this slide up the last time I presented too. We could replace that with, this may, oh, okay, so I always mess up this slide. Okay, so this makes it fun to watch because like I am really there. This may make it feel realistic, like I am really there. When a tragedy is on television, it may be helpful to remember that I am not there. Only the television is in my home, not the tragedy. So instead of this makes it fun to watch my shows, again, we're assigning the feeling of fun. We would just say this may make it feel realistic, like I'm really there. And I just noticed there's a typo in that sentence. Maybe that's why I struggle with this slide. Okay, so never assume or assign feelings. Work to understand the source of a positive or negative emotion versus quickly labeling it. Many of the stories that we write, we're not going to be assigning how you felt, but we can have a comic strip conversation. And in the course of that conversation, see if we can determine how that child felt. We can definitely cause a lot of confusion by misidentifying an audience emotion. And it can cause a long-term domino effect. For example, a child is crying and you say, oh, you're sad. And no, the child is sick. They have a horrible stomach ache. So then the next time they have a horrible stomach ache, they say, guess what? They say, I'm sad. And we don't know that they have a stomach ache. Authors tend to default to their own experience and may misinterpret audience pragmatics as a result. Boy, that's true. We all do that and continue to do that. As we write the stories for Ukraine, Team Social Stories, we're constantly, now and then, we don't make too many mistakes, but occasionally We review all the stories, all three authors, and we catch one another on mistakes where in one way or another, we have basically defaulted to our own experiences. Okay, when people have COVID-19, they may recover at home or go to the hospital. I may have questions. My caregivers will try to answer my questions. So demonstrating that we can still acknowledge feelings and without mentioning or assigning them. Here are some other strategies to positively share negative information in a social story. Go to the third person. For example, instead of writing "I often interrupt," as we may have mistakenly done in a story for Eric, we could use "Many children make mistakes with interrupting. Gradually, they learn when to talk and when to let another person talk." Emphasize teamwork. My mom and dad are on my team. They made mistakes with interrupting when they were children. They're on my team. They will help me as I learn when to talk and when to listen. Never, ever, ever, ever use the first person in reference to a child's undesirable behavior. For example, there's no reason to be upset. So where's our example of using, that's a mistake. First person in reference to a child's undesirable behavior. Yeah, that needs to be fixed. Okay, here we go. So rephrase the following. There's no reason to be upset when the fire alarm goes off. I gave you some ideas. What could we say instead? And I'll give you about a minute to do that. Okay, here we go. We're going to save it or erase it. What about this statement? I will try not to run. Can we use it in a social story? No. I would change it to, I will try to walk. And I would give it some context too, in the school building or where you are referring to, or in the hallways at school, because we do want children to run often when they are in the gymnasium. There we go. What about this one? All children make mistakes sometimes. Can we save it? Is it emotionally and socially safe? Or do we have to erase it? I would say we save it, keep it. Okay. The fourth factor of the 5 factors is every social story is literally accurate. Every sentence is accurate when interpreted literally. For example, we can't use this sentence, "My class eats lunch at noon," because what if the teacher announces, okay, time for lunch, and it's 2 minutes to noon, or it's 5 minutes after noon, or we have an assembly, and so the time for lunch has been altered a bit to accommodate the assembly. This also applies, by the way, if you want to reduce anxiety within a classroom, teachers often post the classroom schedule on the wall, and it says, for example, art, Tuesdays, 2:00. Instead, have it say art, usually Tuesdays at about 2:00. I have one student I can think of on my caseload whose anxiety was significantly reduced when we changed the classroom schedule in the room, because he was interpreting it so literally. And whenever art was not right at on Tuesday at 2:00, would become very upset. We have to go to art. We have to go to art. We have to go to art. And so just by simple rephrasing of the chart, the problem was solved. So my class eats lunch at about noon, or my class, to make it even better, my class usually eats lunch at about noon. So it's about time. The concept of time, and we have so many different words in the English language that refer to time and with very fine distinctions between them. And so I thought we really have to clarify this for children with autism. And so I developed basically a chart to illustrate, and then I placed the terms that we use in reference to time on the chart to indicate from never, like it hardly ever occurs, all the way to it's something that happens all the time. And then I wrote a social story about this particular chart, and it is in the 15th anniversary edition of the Social Story book. Okay, continuing with every sentence is accurate when interpreted literally. What about this? It's important to keep all eyes and ears at the front of the room. I was observing a classroom of 12-year-olds, a sixth grade classroom. It was my first observation of a child suspected to be possibly on the autism spectrum. And as I arrived, the children were arriving well, and I asked arriving at the same time. And I asked the teacher, please don't identify the student that I'm observing. I want to see if maybe I can pick him out within the first half hour. And if not, then I'll have you identify him. The teacher said, okay, it was very early in the school year. In fact, it was like the second or third day of school. She was not real familiar with this little guy as well either. She walked to the front of the room and she said, okay, I need everyone's eyes and ears up here. And Benjamin, 12 years old, stood up and walked to the front of the room. And this teacher, bless her heart, one of the most talented teachers I have ever observed. She has a classroom of children that are on the border of laughing at the error of the student, and the teacher said, oh my goodness, I misspoke. Thank you for listening so carefully to me and acknowledging Benjamin absorbing his error. And she said, what I should have said is, I need everyone to be listening to what I say and watching what I do up here. And she said, thank you, Benjamin, for listening so carefully. And what she said to every student in that room is that, without saying it directly, is that you will be emotionally and socially safe in my classroom. Nobody here is ever going to have fun at the expense of another person's ear. This is a billboard from the Grand Rapids Airport. It's right near the bag claim. What is the message of this billboard? It's a little billboard right where you get your luggage. Holland, Michigan, 30 minutes and a world away. Really? So what does this mean? Holland, Michigan is apparently on another planet, but it's only 30 minutes from here. Wow. Where have I been? Or this Holland, Michigan is a unique place to visit and it's close by. Yeah, that's what the billboard means. But yet there's nothing in this sign that indicates that it's a unique place to visit, which it is, or that it's close by. And actually, yes, it's about 10 miles north from me. They just had their great big tulip festival. So it's not just people or spoken words that may be interpreted literally. It is anything in writing. Inanimate objects contain information. I'll give you a case example. This used to be my private office. It was where I worked. with children privately. And the model was basically that I would meet with children, ranging ages, starting at about 3 years old, all the way up to, gosh, 20, 21 at the time. Now I work with adults that are much older. But there was an office upstairs, there was a playroom upstairs, and there was just kind of looked like a little bit like a living room upstairs where I could meet with older students. And so I was working with Stephanie. Stephanie, about 10 years of age, very bright young lady, diagnosed at the time with Asperger's syndrome. And she came to work with me that day. I always had parents stay in the living room on the main floor, and I'd have them read articles that might be of interest to them related to their child. And I was working upstairs with Stephanie, and things were going really well. She was in a great mood, having a great time. And our session is over. And so she's heading down the steps. She's chatting away. Everything's going well. We entered the living room. Her mom gathered her things and stood up, and we proceeded through the living room. And now we went into the dining room, and then we got to the entrance to the kitchen, and it was there that Stephanie quickly turned around. Now she's facing me. I was immediately behind her. Her facial expression had changed. Her mood had changed. Her anxiety was very high. And she said, "Mrs. Gray, why did you change your dog's name to Popcorn?" My initial reaction was to say, I didn't change my dog's name to Popcorn, Stephanie. But then, is Stephanie going to be more anxious or less anxious as a result? Likely more anxious, because definitely now we are arguing perception. Stephanie believes that I've changed my dog's name to Popcorn. I did not. If I say, no, I didn't, now we got, yes, you did. No, I didn't. And the anxiety goes sky high. So it was at this moment that I found a response that I use many times, and I've used many times since. It just occurred to me. I said, Stephanie, I need a moment to think. Do you ever think that Stephanie needs a moment, or that Stephanie needs a moment to think? Yeah, but man, nobody ever really, well, once in a while, people might say, I need a moment to think. But boy, if we routinely were to demonstrate and say and announce those times when we need a moment to think, that would make that a pretty acceptable thing to do. And I think there's many times that people with autism need a moment to think. And I think there are probably even more times when the people working on their behalf do need a moment to think, but don't recognize it. So I said, Stephanie, give me a moment to think. And I looked into the kitchen, trying to figure out why she thought I turned my dog's name to Popcorn. Remember way back when we were talking about the philosophy, social humility, there's our perspective and the perspective of the person with autism. And the one thing we never want to do is argue perception. And so to avoid arguing perception, I'm looking through this kitchen and I'm thinking, why does she suddenly think I changed my dog's name to Popcorn? What had happened that day is the dog's typical dog dish for water wasn't there, and the dog was thirsty. So from the cupboard, I grabbed a bowl and filled it. I didn't even look. I didn't even know it was the popcorn bowl, put it on the floor. This is Stephanie walking out of a house with two caring adults, and she's assaulted by a bowl with water on the floor, and her anxiety goes sky high. A typical kid, same age, same intelligence, walking out of that home, if they noticed the popcorn bowl on the floor, they would likely tell themselves the logical story. They wouldn't need for me to explain the story, as I did to Stephanie. I said, "Oh, Stephanie, I have to explain something to you." And I explained what had happened, and she said, "Oh, okay." Once again, very calm, but then she added, "Can you turn that word popcorn to the wall?" In other words, the written information, the visual information is competition for the explanation that I had just given her. So I did, and I prayed that the word popcorn wasn't on the opposite side. It was not. This is Stephanie. What happened? What happens to Stephanie in a classroom with 27 children? Can you imagine the inanimate objects that can present you with information that just doesn't make sense? So maybe that's why so many of our kids come home exhausted from a school day. Our time is up. I have so enjoyed this particular format. It's phenomenal. Next week, we will be finishing our discussion of social stories. Won't take us much time to do that, probably. And then we will be moving on to what's going to happen next, social stories in the future. And you will be receiving or things that I've never shared with any audience related to social stories. And it will pretty much be one idea after the other so that I can use the time effectively and share as much as I can with you. So you will be receiving another set of handouts. So watch for that because you will need them as we move ahead into new directions following our discussion of the 10 criterion. And thank you for, I know it's late for some of you where you are, so I've taken 2 minutes of your rest, so I want you to get to bed. So anyway, take care. I really have enjoyed my time with you in this particular webinar.
Thank you very much, Carol, for your wonderful sharing. And yeah, next class is our last sections, and I think all of us will miss this experience so much. And this next time is the last session, but it's not. It's just the beginning of our journey in social story. Okay, so again, for all your questions that's left in the Q&A in the chat box, we will copy it down and we will pass it to Carol. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Stephen.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day. Bye.
Bye.